Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you how to separate a mixture. Very, very simple. Sand, iron filings and copper. So it's a little bit of a sample of each mixed together. And because we want to work out how much of each, the first thing we do is weigh it. So I'm going to weigh the whole thing and write it down. So this says 29.26, and I didn't bring a pen, so that's why I'm using that. And then I'm going to find out how much the container weighs. So I'm going to tip it into, I think it's here. And the container, surprisingly enough, weighs 14.26. So we can work out exactly how much the container weighs later. And the first thing to do is to think about the separation methods. So we have separation methods, and they are what you need to do in a very specific order. Just checking that the camera is still working. Yes, it is. So we have iron filings, sand and salt. If we do things in the wrong order, it makes things more difficult. So the very first thing I think should happen is you get your magnet and you separate the iron filings from this. So we can do that with filter paper, and I wish I'd brought a second piece, that would have been a good idea. Put the filter paper in so that we don't dirty our magnet, and then get all the iron filings to stick to the filter paper. So I'll just show you that. There they are. And if I'm more successful at this, I'll be able to extract them all and separate them, and then hopefully nice and neatly put them into here. So that's one way of getting your iron filings out of the mixture, is to use the property that iron is magnetic, and therefore the rest is left behind. And because there's very, very tiny bits in here, you need to really give it a good whirl around, because even though it looks like there's nothing in there, there's still plenty. And this is the same as what you'll get in your kit. So you can do the same procedure. So what you need to do is make sure you really get that magnet into all of that. And don't let go your magnet until you're over something you want to collect it into, otherwise it all falls off the paper. So you must keep the paper pressed up, the magnet pressed up to the paper so that you don't. And it's surprising how much is there. You look in there and you think, oh, I can't see any more, but the magnet will find some more. So you really have to give it a really good couple of goes, and you'll get all of it out, hopefully. I think it's pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. Right. Okay, so once you've done that, we can weigh how much we've got there, because we want to know how much was in the original. So putting that on our balance and then tearing, my balance is saying hello, and it's come up with 0 because it's teared, which is right. And now I can pour this in carefully try and get it all. And we can write down how much is in there. So the iron filings is 2.9 grams according to the scale. Okay, and so the very next thing we're going to do is separate our salt and our sand. So the salt in this case is copper sulfate. So what we're going to do is we're going to dissolve the copper sulfate, because if you were trying to separate this, you look up the properties of each one of these substances and you find that copper sulfate is soluble whereas sand is not. So that's a good way that we can separate these two. So by adding a bit of water and stirring, I can dissolve the copper sulfate. A little bit of water and stirring. Now you want to stir until you can't see any more blue crystal and the water should go blue. And that is the advantage of using copper sulfate for this exercise versus normal table salt, which you could use, but however you wouldn't know whether you've used it all, whether you've dissolved it all, I should say. And our sand is white, so it's very white sand. And I can also see that the magnet did a very good job of getting those iron filings out. So when you're doing this, just have a look at the sand and see whether all the blue bits have got out. And keep stirring until the blue bits are no longer there. Alright, that's good. And now we're going to, I think that most of that is being dissolved. See the blue liquid? That's copper sulfate solution. It was copper sulfate crystal, but now it's copper sulfate solution. And we want to separate these two things. So how you do a liquid and a solid is you can separate it by filtration. So here's our piece of filter paper, which mine's a little bit munted now because I used it. I was hoping to have two pieces. Then you fold it in half, then you fold it in half again, and then you open it up so that it's a bit of a cone, like that. And what you can do is wet the inside of your funnel a little bit so it sticks. And it doesn't matter if a bit of water goes into here, or actually I might put it in here. So that's wet now, put it in, and this should stick to it a little bit better, although it doesn't seem to be. Right, now this is a conical flask, this is your funnel, and this is your filter paper, and here is what we've dissolved. So now I'm going to pour it in here very slowly and carefully. What you want to do is not have too much solid, sort of decanting at the same time. You don't really want the solid to come out, so it's pretty heavy. So you should not try and get all the sand in there, you should try and leave the sand behind. Now this won't be perfect, you always lose a little bit when you try and separate substances, but it should be as accurate as you can make it. And when you have a look at this, you can see that that sand is still got a little bit of colour in it. So it means that I didn't get all of the, I can try and get a little bit more out by just adding a little bit more water to it and seeing whether I can still get, and you can see there's still some more to dissolve because the liquid is blue. So you keep washing your sand until you don't have any more blue colour, and then you know that you've got it all. And I think this sand was a little bit dirty because you can see a little bit of black dots in there as well. Tip that in as well. And now that's a good colour for the sand, which means I've done quite a good job in separating it. Alright, so once we've done that, we can wait for that, and with the sand, any that's on the filter paper, we can dry. So I'll just try and get all the liquid out I can. So what we want to be able to do is weigh each component once we've separated it. So what we're going to do is leave this overnight and it will dry, and then we'll weigh this dish, and we'll then, when the sand's dry, and we'll weigh the empty dish so that we can work out how much sand we've got, and we will weigh the filter paper when the sand is dry, and then I'll weigh a piece of filter paper so we know how much sand was collected by filtration, and then we add those two together and you'll get how much sand. So I'll just repeat that. We need to wait till this is dry because otherwise we get the weight of the water with the sand, and we just want the weight of the sand. So we will leave this overnight to dry. When it's dry, we'll weigh the whole thing on here. We'll write down that weight, and then we'll empty the dry sand into another container, such as this, and then we'll weigh this completely clean and take one from the other, the empty vessel from the vessel with the sand, and then you'll have the weight of the sand in there. With the filter paper, once that's drained out, I'll carefully remove it, but I won't try and open it. I'll leave it to dry, and then I will weigh the whole thing, the dry filter paper plus whatever sand is collected in there, will be very little, and then I'll weigh a piece of dry filter paper and take one from the other, add the two sand components together, and then we know how much sand there is. So then we've separated two of the three by two different methods, one by magnification and the other one by filtration. And then the last step is to get this liquid, which is your copper sulfate solution, and you're going to put it into a dish and you're going to let it evaporate, and that takes quite a long time. You can speed that up by heat, and if you're lucky enough to have a Bunsen burner, you would fill this with water over a Bunsen burner with the tripod and a gauze, and you put your Bunsen burner underneath, and you put your dish, let's say it's this, over the top with this in it, and you would heat this water until it heats the bottom of your dish, and it cause the water to evaporate and leave blue crystals behind. But because you are doing this at home and you don't have a Bunsen burner, you can either try some other heating device, or you can just leave it in a dish and it'll slowly evaporate and leave crystals behind. If you leave it in the sun or somewhere where the water will eventually evaporate. However, we don't need the mass of copper sulfate if we assume that we have not lost any mass. Of course we have, but if we make the assumption that we have not lost any in this process, then we have the mass of our iron filings, we'll have the mass of our sand, and we will have then the ability to work out by subtraction how much copper sulfate must have been in the original, when you consider that you already know how much you started with. So I'm going to leave this overnight to dry, and then I will turn the video camera back on and complete this activity.